My name is Kate Taylor. I'm one of the program advisors for the selection, and it's my absolute pleasure to be hosting this press conference for The Thing with Feathers. Following his successful work across music documentary, including Shut Up and Play the Hits, No Distance Left to Run, and Meet Me in the Bathroom, this film marks the fiction debut from writer-director Dylan Southern, announcing him as a significant new talent in storytelling. It's a film that maps the territory of grief with huge psychological depth and emotional acuity. It will have its European premiere tonight as part of the Berlinale special gala. I will introduce the team next to me. Please join me in welcoming them. Furthest from me is writer-director Dylan Southern. Welcome. And playing the character of Dad in the film, please welcome actor Benedict Cumberbatch. So I get the first question. Dylan, can you talk to us about your relationship to Max Porter's novella, and I guess the moment when you decided that you wanted to make something cinematic from the material?
Yeah, I mean, I first read Max's book in 2015, shortly after it was published, and I was kind of profoundly moved by it. I'd sort of never seen the subject matter of grief handled in a way that was, so singular and unique. It's kind of a mixture of prose and poetry. It's an incredibly thin volume, but it just contains so much depth and nuance and insights into something that everyone either has been through or will go through. And my particular connection to it was that I'd kind of lost people when I was young, and at age 18, at the point when you're just starting to see the possibility in life, to suddenly be confronted with how finite it is and how that can come at any moment. And I don't think at that age I had the tools to deal with that, so I kind of pushed it down, kept it with me, and assimilated it in some way. And I think Max's book opened up a lot of stuff for me. It kind of gave a language to some of the things that I'd felt or some of the ways that I'd behaved. It gave permission for some of those things as well. And it didn't seem like an obvious thing to adapt into a film at first, because the book is so wildly kind of formally inventive and so plays with structure. It's in 3 different perspectives, it's in different tenses, it spans multiple years. But the more I kind of dug into it, the more the shape of a film emerged, and a film that couldn't be exactly what the book is, but could share its DNA and could be as experiential. And, in making this film, I wanted people to go through this period in the family's life and to feel the things that they feel. And I think, the book did such a wonderful job of that for me as a reader. The cinematic language for it very quickly became obvious to me, or clearer to me as I progressed through it.
Absolutely. Okay, over there.
Hello, Anna York, Pop Matters. Congratulations to both on a fantastically poignant film. My question is actually for both of you. Max Porter's work is quite uncanny, as you've mentioned, insofar that it doesn't really focus on dialogue to bring its themes to life. And this is also one of the problems we've seen with Dad, that he couldn't really verbalize his grief or verbally process it. So how did both of you, together or separately, go about creating this grief viscerally and visually and emotionally without using excessive dialogue? Thank you.
So, I mean, you're right, the book is, it's very kind of poetic prose in the book, and there isn't a lot of dialogue. But that's one of the things that attracted me. In this film, there's a duality to it. You have these moments of domesticity and these moments of just having to get on with life, but you then have these kind of expressionistic sequences in which Crow kind of takes over, and that sort of duality of like the everyday and these more fantastical sequences that are very much expressionistic representations of what's going on for Dad in those quieter moments. That was the thing that was really kind of interesting to explore cinematically, the way that Crow can arrive in a memory and take over the memory and say, no, I'm not going to allow you to be sentimental. I'm not going to allow you to explore this magical thinking that she could come back, or, you know, so that's very much the function of Crow, as grief does. It kind of sweeps your feet from under you and makes you be realistic about what's happening. So, yeah, it was a bit of a, you know, to be as playful as Max is with words on the screen, and to kind of take the audience into these kind of psychological spaces. It was really, really fun. Yeah, and then
I chiefly like things that allow interior thought in cinema and cinematic language to be seen and imagined or witnessed in a non-verbal way. And I think the way certain shots were set up and situations where you see Dad in small bottlenecks of moments of privacy where he can then express himself was sort of is one of the gifts of putting a lens, a camera on Max's novel. So I saw it in very sort of cinematic terms, I suppose, in that regard. I think also, just like Dinah was saying, this bleed between the conscious and the subconscious, very rare. Well, a lot about this, I hope, is quite rare terrain for examining grief. It's male. It deals with this very particular milieu of man and age of man, but which is not so unique, but the way it does so by bringing in something that exists psychically in the trauma of grief. It isn't represented or presentational in conscious everyday living, the mundane thing of how you get through the day, when the memory is going to hit you, when your disassociation is going to hit you, when you're, what else? Magical thinking, anger, how all those things that come up in behavioral psychology, which is also in the script and in moments in the film. But this subconscious thing, the dream state, the manufacture of some kind of manifestation of grief other than the day-to-day, to play off that in one film is kind of an incredible language, different language for me to work with The Crow, with the boys' experience of Crow and mine as Dad. And there were just really deft moments in the script where it was clear to go back to sort of the causal reality of everyday mundanity, where, for example, he was getting angry quite a lot, but in different ways with the kids, and it's always at points of losing control. And that's what grief, the first car crash, adrenaline rush, full horror film aspect of grief really is, which is a realization that you're not in control. No one is. No one knows what's going to happen in 10 minutes. And it's so, in this instance, so sudden for this family. That the fear of that, I think, started to transfer into his behavior. So he'd be cross with them because he'd lost them in the woods. He'd lost another thing, but it wasn't really that. It was the fact that he'd lost his wife, and anything could be lost to him at any moment. And he realizes that and breaks down in remorse and asks for their forgiveness and just says, "I'm so sorry. I miss her. I miss Mummy so much." So it's very deftly written into the script in a more psychological way, but also in a sort of pseudo semi-conscious way as well. So both of those states to play with are really interesting, to be less verbal. Unlike me, I'm very verbal, unfortunately. That answer proved.
Okay, over here.
Hello, Catalina Inonea, Romanian magazine Conștiința. Congratulations, Mr. Cumberbatch, for a great performance.
Thank you very much.
Also, congratulations to the young boys.
Yes.
Who also did lovely.
Two great young actors, I have to say now. They're upset that I call them non-actors. I understand why, but they are brilliant actors. But they were non-actors when they began this job, and hence one of the reasons they're so brilliant.
Great.
Yeah, hope that makes up for it, boys. Sorry, wherever you are.
My question goes to Mr. Southern. The book you based your film on is called Grief, is the Thing with Feathers, and that's an allusion to a verse from a poem by Emily Dickinson. Hope is a thing with feathers. The poem is called Hope. And I was wondering, to what extent can we interpret your film in the key of Emily Dickinson's poem, Hope? Because you reduced the title as neither hope or grief. And also, the main character in the novel is an academic. You declared after the Sundance Film Festival, you decided to change the profession to make it more appealing for the audience. But that academic was working on an biography, for the poet Ted Hughes, author of the famous Crawl, From Life and Songs of Crawl. That was his main work after the death of his wife, the great American poet Sylvia Plath, who committed suicide in 1963 after a horrible breakup from Ted Hughes. They did have 2 children, and also after suffering from depression. So we don't really see the main character, the feminine character, but we see her blonde hair a lot of times. Should we understand, or could we understand that as an allusion to Sylvia Plath and her complicated relationship to Ted Hughes? Thank you.
Just say yes.
Yes. I mean, you could, yeah. Yeah, I mean, there should be an allusion to Dickinson's poem, you know, and the fact that it doesn't say either grief is or hope is in the title is a choice. And I think in this film we move through like different aspects of grief. I don't want to say stages of grief, because I think the whole point of this film is to deny that kind of self-help way of looking at grief, that it's something that you move through in 5 steps and you're cured and healthy and, you know, whole again at the end of it. That's not what this is about. It's about how you assimilate grief. And, you know, within that, there's, as Benedict was saying, the initial horror of grief, you know, the raw shock and the anxiety of, like, it's just happened to you. There's things like magical thinking, you know, she might come back, I might wake up one day and this was all a dream. There's things like survivor's guilt, you know, and how that can quickly turn into anger. But in the film, there is also hope, and that's the hope that comes from the support of friends. It comes from the love of your children. It comes from finding a way and the agency to move through this situation and kind of assimilate grief rather than fight it, and to use it for what it's useful for. So I definitely want people to take away the idea of hope from this film. That's a huge part of what the intention is. A film made by lots of people who gave it their all and crafted it beautifully, and it was made with kindness, and it is a film about hope. And then I guess changing Dad's job, it wasn't just the visual thing, it was kind of the usage of the Hughes poetry wasn't that straightforward, and I think in the book Dad does do a lot of doodles. You know, he's drawing whilst he's working on this academic thesis about Hughes, but the pictures that he draws give you a real insight into what's going on for him. And I just like the idea, you know, there's been a book made which does in a very literary way. There's been a play that did it in the way that you can only do on stage, and this was the film, and I wanted to make it as visual as possible, which was why I kind of lent into this idea of Dad as an artist. And also there's a huge element of this film that's about the power of creativity when you're going through something like this. You know, it's there in the way the boys play, the way that they make things, it's there in Dad's work, and it's there in the fact that, you know, storytelling is one of the great ways we have of understanding the lives that we live. So that was the main reason for that choice.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you. My question is to Benedict. Hello. I'm from Georgia, and maybe you know Georgia very well. You were working on Courier with Merab Ninitz, and we are very proud of it. And my question is about your character. How did this character help you to find inside your inner fears, for example, because we all have our inner fears, and how was this period when you were working and thinking about this? How did you learn to fix our inner feelings, fears, and about this experience? How was this journey? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know about fix, but I think as Dylan alluded to, assimilate them and live with them and accept them and to use them. I think a lot of this film was about letting go, about grief. Is part of that is letting go, understanding that something that was once there is not there anymore. It's too trite to say that that's something of what we do as actors, but I suppose it is. You know, you definitely don't want to take this work home. In a literal sense, but in a more profound sense, learning as an artist or as a human being and asking questions of what it is to be both. Yeah, of course I learned things. I hope I do with every job, and I hope I assimilate those into my life. Yeah, it's hard to be specific. I think there were lots of elements in this that were very unpredictable and required just leaning in and having faith rather than overstudy, overthink, or overstretch, just letting things happen. Capturing lightning in a jar, as it's often likened to. You know, we had real crows, animatronic crows, 2 children who'd never acted before, who were brilliant actors. The joy was just letting all of those elements play and not trying to, when it came to being in any sort of lost state of grief or behavior of grief, to just see what happened rather than preordain what should happen. And it was very collaborative and very tolerant to that and facilitating for that. You know, it was about, is there something there? Is there not something there? And odd moments would just sideswipe me, like folding. It's only a small part of the montage in the film, but there was a moment of folding the clothes up for the final time, of taking the wife's clothes off the rack and leaving an empty rack and folding the clothes into the box. And you know, I'm 48, I've been through a bit, I've lived, I've experienced grief. I think most people have by my age. It just really struck a chord, really struck a chord. And I wasn't expecting it. So, yes, I think when you leave it alone, the unexpected stuff happens, which is really fun. I mean, it sounds perverse when talking about grief, but as far as the artistry of making something feel or look or be real in that moment for a character, you just leave it alone and it happens. So, yeah, letting go, I guess, was my chief takeaway. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Hello, Theo. Oh, that's loud. From Rolling Stone, Germany. I have a question about like art, and art always like shows a part of the society. And what you think as an actor and as a writer about like your job with like reflecting these things with the society. And because we're a music magazine, what's your favorite song right now? Thank you.
No.
You can start with the easy question if you want.
What's the last question first?
Yeah, if you want.
I don't know I don't really do favourites. I mean, something I'm listening to a lot of. Arlen Cooper, he's a wonderful artist. You know, yeah. There you go. He's a fan. He's very special.
I'm listening to a lot of MJ Lenderman and a guy called Thomas Dolbaum.
Deep cuts. As an artist, I think you're dead in the water if you try to go out and proselytize or be didactic. But I think you, again, talking about openness, if you're in the world that you're portraying, you naturally absorb certain things in the zeitgeist. I think as storytellers, as producers, as Sunny March, as filmmakers and writers, you know, you start to collate a collective, and concerns come through that time of life, family, the politics of the world. And I'd say that, you know, a lens on male grief and the strength of being weak, of being vulnerable, of being open and able to learn from tragedy rather than trying to oppose it with more force and more force and more force, I think is obviously quite a prevalent and strong thing. But we certainly didn't go out to make a film to make that statement. I just think that is a natural thing to celebrate in the work we've done. Yeah, uncertainty and emotional vulnerability are not sort of top of the agenda of the alpha male machismo that's being pushed as the strongman image of what masculinity is or should be. So I'm very happy to be part of storytelling that goes in the opposite direction of that. Yeah. Do you?
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, he agrees. Okay, you're welcome.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Nora Staffenhang. I'm a freelancer, and I wanted to thank you for being so vulnerable in this movie and congratulate you on this incredible performance.
Thank you.
And yeah, if it was very difficult being this vulnerable and open on screen, and also how the acting with the children was, because yeah, they were really good and it seemed really natural to watch.
They're here now, policing my every word. No, they were amazing. One of the chief creative joys actually was working with them and treating them as fellow actors. And They were magic, and having never done it before, you know, their experience of it was so fresh and new and alive and honest and had such authenticity because of that it was just a marvel to watch. And you know, it wasn't without challenges at times, but as it should be. It's not a natural environment or a natural thing for a child to be part of, but they really swam with it, and they've given 2 extraordinary performances. What was the other part of your question? Oh, my vulnerability. Yeah, well, so children, a man in a prosthetic animatronic crow suit and bits of tape on the floor for a dead wife as opposed to an actual human. There were lots of things that weren't always, you know, perfect conditions for being vulnerable, but I felt very supported and held primarily because of the friendship I had with this guy, which came about even before the working, that's you, before the working relationship. We had a lot of fun, sometimes too much when we were talking pre-production. So I knew I had someone I could trust, who had good taste, who had a really profound knowledge of cinema, the art of it and the artifice of it, and how to meet in the middle of that. And I felt able to do my work and then leave it alone as well, which is very important. Yeah, I think it is kind of my job. I mean, thank you for what you said, but I don't feel, yes, it's kind of what I do. I know it's a bit of a trite brush aside, but yeah, I think it's part of what actors do. Is show vulnerability, show what we can't always show publicly. And I really enjoy doing that, yeah. I enjoy my job. News headline.
Okay.
Hello. A very beautiful film, very, let's say, moving work in my mind and my eyes. First of all, I would like to address the filmmaker about the certain phenomenology of the film. It's somehow like all the characters are getting absorbed inside each part, each chapter of the film. There is a certain phenomenology in that, which you make a remark on this way of filming. And secondly, Mr. Cumberbatch, how much when a character is inside and it's being dictated by the shadow of loss and trauma can find at the end any kind of redemption in things like art? Is there at the end a way outside of the tunnel through art, and a difference between grief and despair in its polarity? Thank you.
Me first?
Yeah, I'll try and hold on to the question. You might have to repeat something, yes.
I mean, so the kind of structuring of the film around the chapters, each pertaining to a different character, came from a desire to stay true to Max's book. I mean, in Max's book, you cycle through chapters by dad, boys, crow. You know, the boys speak in the past tense, and it very much feels like they're looking back at this time from the future. Dad is very much in the moment, and crow is just anarchic and wild and, you know, just spewing forth this gold dust of Max's amazing writing. But I wanted to give the film an unusual structure. I wanted it was also a way of like making this unwieldy experience that's hard to, you know, there is no structure to grief, but it was a way to do that. That was helpful because that initial part, which is kind of, you know, why we lean into horror, is that the raw shock of grief, the anxiety of it, the why me-ness of it, all feels like horror. You know, Crow arrives and he's introduced very much as an unreliable narrator, and he very much dispels the notion of what type of film you thought you were watching up until this point. He says, oh, well, I could have done those things, but I prefer the therapeutic method. And then suddenly you're into, you know, a different schematic, you know. And then for me, it kind of was solved in the edit. Originally, the boys' narration came earlier in the film, but in the edit, we found that holding off until the midpoint, and then suddenly you get to see what we've been seeing for the first half of the film through the eyes of these two innocent boys, and that they're going through this thing in a very different way to their dad. Like, this is a film about people occupying the same space but living in it in very different ways. And Susie Davis, who designed the set, like really made that kind of exploration of space possible. We could like look into 2 rooms at once and see these different lives being lived. So yeah, it was all about how to kind of like, from a book that is not shaped like a film story at all, to kind of order the events and order some of Max's brilliant chapters and insights into something that felt a little more like a film. It's a very unconventional film, but you know, it was a way of structuring it to give people something to kind of follow through. And yeah, and I think, you know, there's so many choices that were made that were to try and maintain the feeling of the book or try and create the film version of that, like the aspect ratio of the film being 4:3. I wanted this story to exist in a space that had recently changed and to feel confined and contained and claustrophobic, and, you know, also framing these incredible, intimate, almost, you know, photographic portraits, close-up shots of the boys and dad that give you a real kind of window into how they're feeling and what they're thinking, versus these more expressionistic sequences where we've got these wide snowscapes and labyrinthine supermarkets, and, you know, just it was about this film having a duality, you know, allowing us to go inside Dad's head through the way that it's structured and designed.
There's a massive difference between grief and despair. Despair doesn't have hope. Despair is when you're lost to grief. Grief is something you can live with hope, because in the end, the purpose that he finds, and I think this is true of art and kind of life in general, you know, it's paying attention, isn't it? It's a Mary Oliver quote. Attention is the beginning of devotion, and anything that involves an act of devotion becomes a sacred act. So therefore you are then engaged with something of profound meaning, whether that's in your work, whether that's with your family, whether that's in your belief or your practice, or how you relate to the world at large. And, you know, I mean, casual point, if you are in despair, if you're depressed, the minute you start to pay attention to yourself, say you go for a walk, you do some exercise, being in your body is an immediate way to release yourself from going inward. You're going outward, and it starts to relinquish the anchor of despair and give you hope. It gives you something else outside of what despair is, which is a singular trap circle of thought. And I think art has a magnificent power to do that in every form, you know, whether it's a painting or something in nature or a piece of prose or poetry. You know, every art form you can imagine, every observation you can make has something of hope, has the clarity of the divine in it, in my opinion. In some way, shape or form, you can seek that out. And it is a choice. And once you make that choice, it becomes hopeful.
Okay, we have one final question over here.
Hi, it's Natalia Zhuk, Carta, Berlin. My question would be two fast questions to Benedict as an actor and as an executive producer. First of all, I've been following your work for ages, and what I'm always amazed with is how brave you are going deep into the very unpleasant and painful parts of human nature, be it in Patrick Melrose or in The Thing with Feathers or in Frankenstein. So I assume it means that you're a very empathetic person, so you feel things. And at the same time, how do you manage not to really take this work home, and how do you, preserve this your own psychological self by being so open in the stories you tell? And about the executive producing, you are the advocate of new writers, new directors. You do a lot to promote fresh talent. How important is it for you, and how do you do this choice? Who is the next? How do you find these new people? Because they are all great, really. Thank you for that.
Thank you, thank you. My life. Okay, well, no, thank you for your question. I think the extremes stand out in my work for obvious reasons. I'm drawn to the ones that I've tackled because they're kind of meat and drink, you know, for actors. And maybe that's a mistake because there's such profundity, I was alluding to, in the everyday. It doesn't have to be the extremes of the human condition, human experience, but the things that scare me, perhaps this is an answer of sorts, the things that scare me have a real lure. The things I feel uncomfortable about being able to do really draw me in. The things I feel I haven't done before draw me in, although there is a theme that you pointed out, and there are often themes, and there are often parallels between certain characters for sure, but I do try and shake that snow globe up a little bit in my work just to keep myself busy with different points of focus. But look, I think part of our job as storytellers is not to shy away from the true spectrum of what it is to be human, from our very worst to our very best, and everything in between. So whether it's losing a child, whether it's child abuse, whether it's addiction, whether it's hatred and vile anger, whatever it might be that's fueling these characters and their trauma, I think part of my job and where I lean into difficult characters is to explore what is their humanity, if there is any left, or what was it before they were dehumanized, either if that's societal or through a combination of their own actions in society. You know, everyone starts out pretty innocent in my book. Sorry to go against the original sin thing, but you know, I feel we as a society owe a responsibility to those who need our help most, and the ones that fall through the cracks, either as victims or as perpetrators of ill-doing, are the ones we need to help often the most, and don't. We have a very easy time sidelining them or forgetting about them, and that's been a driver of mine, I guess, since I was very young, I guess. And you know, these are sort of extraordinary things to try and do as an actor. So that's the lure. How do I not let this become who I am? Well, I don't know that I'm not. I mean, I think like Mother Teresa, you know, you contain the very worst of humanity as well as the best, and it's what you do with accepting all of it that really counts. And so maybe playing those extremes stops me being those extremes. I know where I'm going with this answer, Christ. But it's certainly not, it's not an exercise in therapy for me. It's more, the process of letting go again is just that. It's an art form, and you know, it often feels unfinished, but that doesn't mean you can finish it outside of the canvas or the blank page, or in my case, the screen or the stage. You just have to let it alone. In the case of theatre, you know, you're dead in the water again if you start chasing the ghosts of where it felt like you were getting somewhere. You can't perfect it. It's imperfectible, so just leave it at that and do your best. And I think, you know, there's a lot of things other than work that are very important in my life to pull me out of any focus on work. And that, you know, that feeds into my work sometimes. But yeah, I have very nice people around me as well. I like producing partly because of that, to create an atmosphere and ambiance for difficult work and for challenging work and supporting new work, to your point, you know, new artists, people who are arriving fresh with a new platform or a new mode of speaking to their truth and what they have to say, what they have to give us culturally. So that's a very exciting part of what we do at Sunny March, and I've been thrilled to be part of that in front of the camera, but equally so behind, in many cases. So I feel that's, yeah, it's a nice thing to be able to lend the focus on me too. And to keep culture fresh, so it's not just me or anyone else that we know. And then I guess, yes, just to leave that thing. I go to work, I work, and then I leave, and the two things seem to be very separate. I arrive and I leave it there when I leave.
Thank you very much to the filmmakers.
Thank you.